This video is about the 6 kingdoms of life, and specifically, it's about fungi, plants, and animals, the multicellular eukaryotic kingdoms of life. Biologists organize living things into 6 kingdoms, and these kingdoms are the eubacteria, the archaebacteria, protists, fungi, plants, and animals. These are some of the characteristics that we use to categorize living things. Some living things are unicellular, some are multicellular, meaning some have only one cell and some have many cells. Some are prokaryotic and some are eukaryotic. Prokaryotes do not have a nucleus, whereas eukaryotes do. Some organisms reproduce asexually, whereas others reproduce sexually. And the offspring of organisms that reproduce asexually are identical to their parents, whereas with organisms that reproduce sexually, their offspring are genetically distinct from their parents. Autotrophs are organisms that can produce their own food. They can take things that are not food and turn those things into food, whereas heterotrophs cannot do that. They have to eat other organisms. And autotrophs can also be called producers, whereas heterotrophs can also be called consumers. The autotrophs produce food for themselves and the heterotrophs. Eubacteria and archaebacteria are prokaryotic. They do not have a nucleus in their cells. They're also all unicellular. Whereas protists, fungi, plants, and animals are all eukaryotic. That means they do have a nucleus in their cells. Protists are unicellular eukaryotes, and fungi, plants, and animals are multicellular eukaryotes, although some fungi are unicellular. Fungi are multicellular eukaryotes. We say they're multicellular because they're composed of many cells. We say they're eukaryotes, they're eukaryotic, because their cells contain nuclei as well as other membrane-bound organelles. The cells of fungi have cell walls, and those cell walls are composed of chitin, and this distinguishes fungal cells from plant cells. Plant cells also have cell walls, but the cell walls of plant cells are composed of cellulose, not chitin. Fungal cell walls are composed of chitin. If you're trying to picture a fungus, picture a mushroom. Mushrooms are a type of fungus. And it might be helpful to picture that mushroom growing on a tree. I think these are just growing on the ground, but picture a mushroom growing on a tree. And I want you to do that because it'll help remind you that fungi are heterotrophs. They can't make their own food. They eat other organisms. Another way of saying it is they obtain food from their environment. So just like us, fungi eat other organisms. They cannot make their own food. And it's also true that there are some unicellular fungi. Yeasts are unicellular fungi, but most are multicellular. And some related words, fungus, fungal, fungicide, these words are all related to the word fungi. Plants are multicellular eukaryotes, just like fungi and just like animals. What distinguishes plants from fungi and animals, among other things, is that plants are autotrophs. Plants make their own food. They take things that are not food and they turn those things into food. And the cells of plants have cell walls, and those cell walls are composed of cellulose. So as we said, with fungal cells have cell walls, but their cell walls are composed of chitin. The cell walls of plants are composed of cellulose. All plants have chloroplasts. Chloroplasts are organelles that carry out photosynthesis. And photosynthesis is the process by which plants make their own food. We said plants are autotrophs. Well, this is why. Because plants contain chloroplasts, and chloroplasts can carry out photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is a process by which things that are not food are turned into food. And chloroplasts are green, and this is why plants are green. In the image, we see very green trees and we see the green grass. Plants are green because they contain chloroplasts. and chloroplasts are green. Plant cells have a central vacuole, and the central vacuole stores water and nutrients, and it also offers structural support. These images here show the vacuole very clearly. We have the vacuole here, this big white image in the middle of the cell, and then we have the central vacuole over here. The central vacuole is very helpful in diagrams on the MCAS because it gives the image away as a plant cell. I want to talk just a bit about these diagrams because you need to be able to recognize these images on the MCAS. So these are all examples of plant cell structures, diagrams of plant cell structures on the MCAS. Let's start on the left. We know this is a plant cell. For one thing, it has a central vacuole. That helps give it away. Now, we also know that this doesn't necessarily give it away as a plant, but it is helpful to know that this organism or this cell has a nucleus because all plants have a nucleus. Plants also have mitochondria, so it's good to know that that's there. Plants have cell walls, and since we know this is a plant cell, we know that that cell wall is made of cellulose. There's another organelle in this diagram that's not labeled, and you have to be able to recognize it. And that seems almost cruel to me, but you have to know that this tiny pizza bite looking thing is a chloroplast. So know that that's a chloroplast, and that helps identify this cell as a cell of a plant. The central vacuole helps us out again in this image on the bottom right. We know this is a plant cell because we have a central vacuole. We can make out some other structures too. Here's the nucleus. This is the endoplasmic reticulum. But how about the mitochondria? Can you find the mitochondria? There are two of them. This is one. This is two. Can you find the chloroplasts? There are three of them. Here's one. Here's two. And this third one is kind of hiding in the shadows. You need to be able to identify those structures on the MCAS. You need to be able to see that that is a mitochondria and that that is a chloroplast. Up on the right, we have an image of a chloroplast on its own. And you can see it sort of has that same structure. We have a circle or an oval, and inside of it we have these other circles stacked on top of each other. Those are called thylakoids. You don't actually need to know that, but the point is that this is a chloroplast on its own. We have that same structure, even though it might not look exactly the same. Again, you have to be able to identify this as a chloroplast. There are some other things that are going to help you out about this image, and we'll talk about in the next video, but we have carbon dioxide, we have sunlight, we have H2O, that's water. These are the reactants, or the CO2 and the H2O, those are the reactants in photosynthesis. So those also give this away as a chloroplast, and we'll learn more about that in the next video. But you have to be able to identify that as a chloroplast on the MCAS. Finally, there are the animals. Animals are multicellular eukaryotes. Animals are made of many cells, and their cells contain nuclei as well as other membrane-bound organelles. The image on the right you would recognize as an animal. There's a monkey. The image on the left is also of an animal. Insects are animals, so those ladybugs are fellow animals. Animals are all heterotrophs. That means we can't make our own food. We have to eat other organisms. So animals eat other organisms. And the image down on the right helps remind us of that. There's no fungi in that image. So remember, we can eat mushrooms, for instance. That's a type of fungus. We can also eat plants. In this image, we have the potatoes, the French fries. We also have the bread. It's made of wheat. That's a plant. And there's something green on that sandwich. I can't tell what it is, but there's other plants on that sandwich. So we eat fungi, we eat plants, and of course we also eat other animals. And so the meat in that sandwich obviously comes from another animal. So we are heterotrophs. All animals are heterotrophs. Animal cells do not have cell walls. Fungal cells have a cell wall made of chitin. Plant cells have a cell wall made of cellulose. but animal cells have no cell wall at all. So these are some images of animal cells from the MCAS, and notice that none of them have a cell wall. If they did, we'd know that they were not animal cells. An organelle that plant and animal cells have in common, an organelle that both plant and animal cells have, is mitochondria. Both plant and animal cells have mitochondria. The mitochondria power the cell. Mitochondria use glucose to produce ATP, and ATP is what cells use for energy. On the right, we have two diagrams, each of a cell. Can you tell which one is the plant cell? Well, the image on the bottom right, that's our plant cell. We have a cell wall, we have a central vacuole, and we even have our pizza bite looking chloroplast. The point here is that on the top we have an animal cell, on the bottom we have a plant cell, and both of them have mitochondria. Prokaryotes reproduce asexually. They copy their DNA and then they split in half. This is illustrated in that image down the bottom left, where we see a prokaryote has already copied its DNA. One copy of that DNA is moving off to the left, another copy is moving off to the right. The cell will split in half, and you'll have two identical daughter cells. That's called binary fission, and that's how prokaryotes reproduce. And it's asexual. There's no DNA exchange between parents. There's one parent, and the offspring are identical to the parent. Protists, fungi, plants, and animals, they can reproduce asexually or sexually. Now, not all, for instance, not all animals can reproduce asexually. Humans just reproduce sexually. But within those four kingdoms, there are organisms that can reproduce asexually and organisms that can reproduce sexually. And sexual reproduction is where two parents come together, they exchange DNA, and their offspring has a combination of the parent's DNA. And so the offspring are genetically distinct or different from the parents. Let's take a look at a few MCAS questions. A cell is shown in the diagram. Which of the following cell characteristics provides evidence that this cell comes from a plant and not from an animal? A large vacuole. B, a single nucleus. C, a functional mitochondrion. Or D, a semi-permeable cell membrane. And the answer is A. Now, notice, we also have our chloroplasts over here, our pizza bites. But the answer is A, it's the large vacuole. That, of course, is this guy here. This sort of looks like a tooth, actually. That's our large vacuole. That gives this cell away as a plant cell. Which of the following statements describes a way in which plant cells and animal cells are similar? A, both types of cells are prokaryotic. That's false, neither are prokaryotic. B, both types of cells are autotrophic. Well, only plants are autotrophic, not animals. C, both types of cells have cell walls. Remember, animal cells do not have cell walls, so we know that the answer is going to be D. D, both types of cells contain mitochondria, and that's true. Plant cells and animal cells contain mitochondria. This question asks us about a species that belongs to kingdom Animalia. And it says, which of the following can most likely be concluded about this species? So the only thing we know about it is that it belongs to the kingdom Animalia, and it has a somewhat intimidating name. But the point is that it belongs to the kingdom Animalia. Is it A, unicellular? No, animals are multicellular. Is it B, prokaryotic? No, animals are eukaryotic. Do animals reproduce through binary fission? They do not. Animals do obtain food from their environment. Remember, animals are heterotrophs. They cannot make their own food, so they eat other organisms. Another way to say that is that animals and other heterotrophs obtain food from their environment. They can't make their own food. They obtain it or get it from their environment. Which of the following types of organisms have cell walls composed of cellulose? A, amoebas, B, birds, C, grasses, or D, worms? We have to, this is assuming that you know that grasses are plants, but assuming you know that, this is an easy question. Plants have cell walls composed of cellulose. And so the answer is C, grasses. A student looks at a cell under a microscope. Which of the following observations would indicate that the cell is from a plant rather than an animal? So which one of these things is going to identify a cell as being from a plant? A nucleus located inside the cell. No, plants and animals have those. Numerous cilia on the outside of the cell. That's actually going to identify it as an animal cell. C, chloroplasts in the cytoplasm of the cell. That's probably it. Or D, a thin membrane around the edge of the cell. That's not it. So the answer is C, chloroplasts in the cytoplasm of the cell. All plants have chloroplasts, but animal cells do not have chloroplasts. This was the second of our videos looking at the 6 kingdoms of life. In the first video, we looked at eubacteria, archaebacteria, and protists. In this video, we looked at fungi, plants, and animals. Fungi, plants, and animals are multicellular eukaryotes. The cell walls of fungi have cell walls, and those cell walls are composed of chitin. Plants have cell walls, and those cell walls are composed of cellulose. But animal cells do not have cell walls. And some of the defining features of plant cells are that plant cells have a central vacuole, plant cells have chloroplasts, and plant cells are able to engage in photosynthesis because they have chloroplasts. Chloroplasts are the site of photosynthesis. And one of the organelles that plant and animal cells, and actually fungi cells, one of the organelles that all three have in common is they have mitochondria. And mitochondria power the cells. Mitochondria turn glucose into ATP.